Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Committee Reads, and this time we are doing something a little different. Usually half the time the original plan was let's read every 100 KWC matches and do a whole year of KWCE matches. Doing something different this time. We're gonna do it every 50 KWC matches will be rewarded with a KWCE reading. So that way we have a nice balance between the KWC stuff and the KWCE stuff. Because, oh boy, 150 took a lot out of us. Not only that, I think KWC moving forward is going to get a lot longer. So I think to better keep things in balance. Yeah, we're doing KWC.
You're just addressing the public. You're not asking a girl out.
So to kick off this new season of the Committee Reads, we have KWCE number 13, Rayquaza vs. Monster X, by Godzilla vs. Rayquaza, also known as GVR, who we have in the chat with us.
Hello.
Prepare to get roasted, motherfucker.
I look forward to it. I'm fine with this. I'm fine with it. I've already gone numb.
You've accepted your fate. High above the Earth's surface, beyond the lives of people and their Pokemon, a god moved through the stratosphere. An emerald-colored serpentine dragon covered in black and yellow markings sailed through the air like a fish through water. Rayquaza was watching for any potential threats to the Earth from space, attentive as ever. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a cluster of meteors. He flew into their path, examining them. None were incredibly large, but they could still do damage to a town or two, especially the one in the center, being nearly 200 meters across. As he considered whether or not to destroy them, he sensed something from the central meteor. It oozed malice and bloodlust on a level Rayquaza had never felt. Something rested inside the meteor with the desire to destroy worlds and the power to do so. A glowing orange sphere manifested before the Sky God's open maw as he prepared his hyper beam. Before he could fire, the space rock exploded, a shadow visible through the dust cloud it made. The Sky Guardian fired the energy ray, only for it to pass through and dissipate the dust as the being inside dodged to the right. Skin as black as the night was wrapped in bleach-white armor of bone. Muscular arms ended in sharp claws. A draconic skull rested on its shoulders, accompanied by two bone-covered half-heads to its sides. Glowing eyes glared at Rayquaza as a frightening mouth breathed out steam. Monster X levitated in place before beckoning to the Emerald Dragon with a wave of his fingers. The Sky God rushed forward as the monster's knight's eyes glowed gold. Rayquaza maneuvered through the gravity beams that Monster X fired, moving like the wind as the skeletal dragon fired again. The jade serpent closed the distance between them, clamping his jaws into Monster X's right arm, his teeth sinking to the flesh. Still crunching the appendage, Rayquaza wrapped his body around the monstrous knight's own, forcing his legs together and pinning the left arm. The skeletal dragon returned the favor, snapping his horrid jaws around one of the protrusions atop of the Sky God's head. Rayquaza's claws glowed white before a sphere of white energy formed in front of him. The orb flattened out as the Sky God drew his claws back, before thrusting them forward. Rayquaza's air slash tore into the skeletal dragon's chest, ripping open flesh and carving trenches into the bone armor. The pain made Monster X throw his head back, breaking the protrusion in his teeth off the Sky God's head. Rayquaza shrieked, relinquished the monstrous knight's arm, and then began charging power into his mouth. The emerald serpent, mouth filled with a purple glow, turned to stare his foe in the eyes. Monster X's eyes glowed in reply. Rayquaza uncoiled rapidly, springing away while still facing the skeletal dragon. Unleashing the energy he had gathered, a violent wave of power surged forward as the monstrous knight unleashed his own blast. The dragon pulse and gravity bolts collided, the energy converging to a mass sphere held between two beams. The beam struggle lasted for a moment before the center violently detonated in a massive explosion. The two dueling dragons were launched back by the blast, roaring as they flew. Both titans caught themselves at roughly the same time, staring at their now distant foe. Monster X began moving forward, manipulating gravity to levitate. He soon discovered Rayquaza was far faster, as the Jade Serpent had already almost reached him in less than a minute. The Sky God's teeth began glowing white as he opened his jaws wide. Before Crunch could land, the skeletal dragon punched Rayquaza across the face with all his might. The Emerald Serpent cried out in pain, the glow of his teeth fading. Monster X spun in place, bashing the back of his fist against the other side of the Sky God's face, before rising and slapping his tail across the serpent's nose. As Rayquaza was disoriented, his vision turning blurry, the monstrous knight's eyes glowed. Rayquaza roared in agony as gravity bolts lanced into his back, blackening the skin where he was struck, and throwing him down. Catching himself, the Sky God twisted and rushed straight towards his foe. Monster X raised his fists, only for a crackling aura to surround and dance around the Emerald Serpent, before fading quickly. Rayquaza's speed suddenly increased from the ancient dragon dance, allowing him to circle around the skeletal dragon. Monster X soon realized his enemy's strength had increased as well, when the serpent had butted him in the side, forcing a groan of agony out of the monstrous knight. The Sky God sped away again, avoiding a retaliatory swipe from Monster X. Rayquaza turned, speeding directly towards the skeletal dragon. The Jade Serpent opened his mouth, before letting out a deafening bellow while the back of his throat glowed. The roar gave way to a massive series of blue rings. Hyper Voice slammed into the monstrous knight, making him double over in pain while he cupped his hands over his ears, his eardrums bursting from the sheer noise of the blast. Pass.
Monster X floated through the air, writhing in pain. He could hear nothing except his shrill ringing, and his vision was blurry as well. Rayquaza charged forward, teeth glowing white once again. The monstrous knight tried to intercept it once again with a punch, but struck nothing but air with the sluggish attack. A moment later, the Sky God bit down on the extended arm. Monster X's vision solidified as horrid pain shot through him, the Jade Serpent's fangs digging through flesh and muscle, grinding against the bone. The skeletal dragon's other hand grabbed Rayquaza's lower jaw, pulling it down. Monster X moved the Sky God's mouth slightly, then cringed as he ripped the entrapped arm away, strands of muscle and black flesh now dangling. Monster X closed his now freed hand around Rayquaza's upper jaw, then closed his foe's mouth while ignoring the serpent's thrashing and groaning. Monstrous Knight's eyes turned to gold as he began to shake from the fury building within him. He fired into the blackened portions of the Sky God's back, blasting away chunks of flesh. Another blast, more damage, and more muffled shrieks of pain from the Emerald Serpent. Monster X's eyes began glowing brighter as he turned to look at Rayquaza's face, charging the gravity bolts further than usual. Before he could fire, Rayquaza thrust his tail forward, holding it in front of the skeletal dragon's face. A tornado shot out of the appendage, striking Monster X in the chin and throwing his head back, leaving the charged gravity bolts to sail into nothingness. Continuing the use of Twister, Rayquaza held his right arm back. A white ball of wind materialized before the claws before quickly flattening into a blade. Swinging his arm, the Jade Serpent used Air Slash again. The blade lanced into the wound on Monster X's arm, carving off a huge chunk of bloodied muscle. The skeletal dragon cried out in agony, relinquishing his grip and drifting back. He checked his damaged arm, making sure it could still function. He flexed his muscles, opening and closing his hand. A realization hit the Destroyer of Worlds. He was dealing damage, but was clearly outclassed. The Sky God had the monstrous knight in an environment that heavily favored the former, and lowering himself to the ground wouldn't do any favors either. Before he could ponder this further, another bellow hit his ears. Rayquaza rushed towards the monstrous knight, a bright red energy forming around his body as he neared. The Jade Serpent slammed into Monstrix before thrashing wildly and violently. Monstrix was assaulted by a hail of furious blows, unable to fight back. Headbutts, claw swipes, tail strikes, bites, and body slams. Rayquaza used any physical attacks he could during outrage. After almost a minute of this brutality, the Sky God stopped, panting heavily. His head swayed back and forth, with the world turning blurry around him. Monstrix drifted away, barely moving. His torso, stomach, arms, and legs were covered in bloody gashes and bruises. His right arm was twisted unnaturally. He was conscious enough to stay airborne, but the sheer pain prevented him from doing much else. Rayquaza stumbled through the air, trying to finish off his foe, but he couldn't see straight. The skeletal dragon's left arm moved to his right, grabbing the ravaged appendage. With a series of cracks and pops, he forced the limb back into place. Where most creatures would be screaming bloody murder, Monstrix was silent, until he began to laugh. It was a raspy, dark laugh. It sounded less like the call of an organic being, more akin to a saw grinding through a tree, though much deeper. Rayquaza shook off his confusion, staring at the monstrous knight. Suddenly, a dark gold pair of wings ripped out of Monstrix's back. Armor, black interlaced with dull gold, began coating the rest of the skeletal dragon's body as his heads began to rise on long necks. And the monstrous knight roared, but it was no longer the baritone bellow it once was. It had changed into a shrill, raspy shriek. Monstrix's arms changed as the armor covered them, turning to thick legs. The monstrous knight's tail grew in length, splitting off into two all the way to the base. Rayquaza opened his maw, an orange sphere manifesting before it. The skeletal dragon's three heads became more traditionally draconic, growing more horns. The transformed dragon twisted his fully healed body to align himself better, obviously now a quadruped. The Sky God fired Hyper Beam, the massive blast pushing him back slightly with recoil. Kaiser Ghidorah fired 3 lightning-shaped gravity bolts, which stopped Hyper Beam cold. With a contemptuous ease, Rayquaza's beam was sent back to him, consuming the dragon in a massive explosion. The black and gold nightmare fired more gravity beams into the smoke cloud, but these did not detonate. They wrapped around the Emerald Serpent's body, pulling him back limply from the smoke cloud. Rayquaza's upper half was covered in scorch marks, and his face wore an expression of pure agony. Kaiser Ghidorah relinquished his hold on the Sky God, earning an enraged roar in response. Rayquaza rushed forward, dodging a trio of gravity beams that came his way. The Sky God shrieked in agony as the bolts circled around, lancing into his back and detonating. The Herald of the Apocalypse fired a single bolt of energy, which crashed against Rayquaza's chest and sent him spiraling through the air. Another gravity bolt from a different head hit the Jade Serpent's back, pushing him down with an explosion and making him screech. Kaiser Ghidorah cackled maniacally, drinking in his foe's suffering. The Golden Nightmare spent the next minute ping-ponging Rayquaza between singular gravity bolts, either hitting him straight on or twisting the beams to hit the sides or back, before ensnaring him with a trio of beams. The Emerald Serpent groaned, not just in pain, but in disappointment. He was being pushed around so easily. How? Had the battle against the being's previous form taxed his energy more than he thought? Kaiser Ghidorah held the Sky God just before him, close enough to touch him. Cutting off power to the gravity hold, the Apocalypse Bringer lashed out with his jaws, sinking them into the serpent's flesh. Rayquaza felt his energy drain rapidly, unable to fight or even scream. Blue lines began to glow on Kaiser Ghidorah's neck, signaling his deadliest ability at work. The cruel dragon shook with muffled laughter, both from the power flowing into him and because he could feel the Jade Serpent's death drawing near. Rayquaza was visibly losing muscle mass, and the Sky God could feel his eyes slowly shutting as he lost consciousness. Kaiser Ghidorah could merely let the being be drained until he died, but he had something far more fun.
Kinky.
Opening his jaws, the Golden Nightmare fired yellow bolts out of them, ensnaring Rayquaza in the gravity hold. The Emerald Serpent was pushed away from Kaiser Ghidorah towards Earth. Once the Golden Dragon had pushed Rayquaza several hundred meters away, he released. The planet's gravity began to grasp the God of the Sky, pulling him down. He soon disappeared from Kaiser Ghidorah's sight, and once he did, the Apocalypse Bringer began descending as well. Horrific grins decorated his faces. He wasn't going towards Rayquaza. In his mind, the serpent was dead or would be soon. The Golden Nightmare was simply going to do what all members of his species did, the very creed emblazoned into their hearts, minds, and souls. Destroy until there is nothing left. Rayquaza fell limply through the atmosphere. Fire began to surround him, heat from re-entry. It would have had him screaming in agony, but he was comatose. Life still coursed through his veins, but he was faint and weak. Clouds parted as the serpent passed through them, approaching a vast expanse of serene water. Any life forms that could see the fallen god would see that he was covered in horrific burns, with 3 massive wounds in his side. Rayquaza crashed into the water. Walls of the liquid rose around him before falling back down in an instant. The deity sank into the depths, still unmoving. Silence pervaded the area as the surface went back to normal. In a dreamless sleep, the once mighty god of the sky was soon surrounded by relatively minuscule life forms, which picked at his wounds with their teeth. Far away in the region known by humanity as Unova, all was normal. They had no idea of the battle waged in the sky, and as such went about their daily lives. In the metropolis of Castalia City, this rang true until the citizens saw it. First there was the shadow, as the sun was blotted out by a dark shape in the heavens. As it got closer, screams of panic began to ring out as they saw it to be a living creature. They recognized it to be a dragon as it drew even nearer, but this was no dragon like anyone on this planet had ever witnessed. Finally, Kaiser Ghidorah landed on the city's outskirts, casting up a wall of dirt and broken trees. He observed Castalia, eyes the color of blood staring at the insects before him. All was calm, as a deathly silence that paralyzed all the townspeople rolled over it. The apocalyptic dragon noticed something flying above him, but he couldn't quite tell what it was due to the distance and size of the object. What he did notice was an even smaller sphere fall from the object, appearing as if it was hurled at him. It fell on his center head and did nothing before rolling off of him. The flying being turned around, fleeing as quick as it could. With a single gravity bolt, what had once been a Pokemon trainer atop one of his flying-type comrades was incinerated. Pass.
You okay, GBR? You sounded bored.
Did I sound bored? I didn't mean to sound bored.
Nah, you're fine, man. You're fine.
Met with a chorus of screams from the city, Kaiser Ghidorah galloped into the city, screeching to the heavens. Buildings and people alike were crushed and pulverized beneath the Golden Nightmare's feet, the destruction ramping up as gravity bolts snaked from its maws and obliterated vast swaths of land. Any structure not crushed beneath his feet were knocked down behind him as his twin tails thrashed into anything he passed by. Torn of tiny beams and projectiles, various elements crashed into his armor. Attacks from the civilians, many Pokemon, but it failed to do anything but superficial damage. The barrage of resistance was merely met with the bolts of alien power, which reduced all in their path to ash. The assault hadn't even lasted 2 minutes, and already the death toll was in the thousands in the sky shrouded in smoke. News spread nigh instantly all over the world. Questions popped up seconds later. If it wasn't a Pokemon, what was this thing? Where had it come from? Could it be stopped? Constant questions such as these were asked as Castilla? What is it?
Castilia.
Castalia City was still laid to waste. All over the world, people began praying for something to save them. Some had specific names of the Guardians in mind. Others just generally asked for a savior before it reached them. Huddled up in whatever portions of the city weren't wreckage, the survivors did the same. For anything to stop this abomination before all was ash. Deep in the ocean, Rayquaza still sank. Various fish and fish Pokemon still picked at his wounds, until suddenly something began glowing within the serpent's body. Shined through the skin scaring them off as it continued growing in luminance. The objects responsible were meteorites, the usual source of subsistence for the god. Long ago, the Leviathan, god of water and beneath, god of earth, observed a surplus of power, becoming primal forces of nature with insane power. Their battle threatened to tear the planet apart, and Rayquaza could not do its usual job of stopping their clash. But somehow, the prayers of the people towards the Guardian made him undergo a temporary metamorphosis. He ascended to a new level, and Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon were defeated now. And now, to stop the destroyer of worlds, he would do it again, carried by the wills of Earth's people. The god of the sky opened his eyes, which shined as well. Suddenly, a massive spear of many vibrant colors surrounded Rayquaza. A symbol resembling a hollow red gem with lines through it on the front. The orb shattered like glass, revealing Rayquaza to be much different looking. Two massive blade-like protrusions extended out on the sides of his bottom jaw, but with thin glowing lines of flesh flowing out their sides and going out to the same length as his tail. Segments of his underbelly had turned black, not like the burns marks, but more like a natural color. His arms were extended and the fins of his body had become longer and sharper. Mega Rayquaza has arrived. An eruption of water rose when the Mega Deity as he shot out of the ocean into the skies to purge the world of its attackers. Despite the great distance, the flight was a short one, only a few minutes. The Emerald Serpent growled at the sight that greeted him. Over 3/4 of Castelia City was in ruins, smoke blotted out of the blue heavens, bathing the city in darkness. The screech the apocalypse bringer echoed through the devastation, filling the survivors with bitter sorrow and fear. The scent of burnt bodies mingled with that of melted metal, pervading every inch of the town. Mecha Rayquaza hovered in place, taking everything. He was greeted by 2 gravity bolts sailing towards him. A dragon pulse left the city sky god's maw, crashing into the bolts. The alien beams were pushing back swiftly, only for a 3rd bolt to join them. Stabilizing the struggles, cutting off his beam, Mecha Rayquaza closely flying parallel to the ground towards Kaiser Ghidorah. The Golden Nightmare tried to bend his beams back to strike the serpent, making them rain down upon his approaching foe, but the Emerald Serpents waved through the trio of attacks. Ground beneath Mega Rayquaza detonated as the gravity bolts hit the shattered concrete. Kaiser Ghidorah tried to attack him, but it was too late as the deity slammed into the dragon's stomach. Mega Rayquaza pushed the apocalypse bringer into the air. A fearsome tail swipe knocked the dark dragon's back legs out from underneath him. Kaiser Ghidorah crashed onto his back, his legs flailing wildly as he thrashed and screeched. The Ascended Serpent used Air Slash. What is this, Pokemon? The Blade of Wind carving
That was
a massive...
Digimon.
Ew. Carving a massive trench in the armor on the Emperor of Terror's stomach, but not before deep enough to draw blood. Mega Rayquaza followed it with a Dragon Pulse. The violent beam crashed into the hole the Air Slash created, blasting it further open and forcing a cry of panic out of Kaiser Ghidorah's maws. Pass.
The Sky God soon discovered the Emperor of Terror's wings were vestigial, as without a single beat of them, Kaiser Ghidorah's whole body left the ground. The Nightmarish Dragon manipulated gravity to flip himself over in midair, screeching in rage. Gravity bolts shot out of the dragon's 3 maws, enveloping Mega Rayquaza and holding him still. The Ascended Serpent was thrown to the ground hard enough to burst through concrete, cracking through the sewer system as well. Kaiser Ghidorah pulled the Ascended Serpent out of the pit, still gripping him with the 3 gravity bolts. The apocalyptic dragon pushed Mega Rayquaza through several skyscrapers, battering the Sky God with the rubble, before whipping around a full 180 degrees. A massive trench was dug through the concrete as Mega Rayquaza was pulled through it, forcing several grunts of pain for the Emerald Serpent until he stopped being dragged like a ragdoll. Kaiser Ghidorah released the God of the Skies before sending him flying back with 3 explosive beams. The blast sent Mega Rayquaza crashing through even more skyscrapers, causing them all to collapse and bury him in a vast pile of rubble, all obscured by a cloud of dust. Kaiser Ghidorah let out a quick shriek, the closest thing he could make to a scoff, before turning to walk away. An explosion made him stop turning, leaving his right side facing the cloud of dust. The Emperor of Terror looked intently at the rubble, trying to see what had caused the noise. Suddenly, a massive, bright orange beam left the haze, spearing into the dragon's side. Kaiser Ghidorah screamed in agony as he was pushed away, the hyper beam burning through his hide. When the beam faded, the Emperor of Terror surveyed the damage with his right head, the center and left staring at the quickly fading haze his opponent was emerging from. The armor where the hyper beam had struck was melted into dripping slag, with a gaping hole in the very center where the now burnt flesh was visible. His right wing had been utterly annihilated in the blast, not a trace of it left. The cloud of dust was now gone, a bloody and bruised Mega Rayquaza floating there. The Emerald Serpent shot forward, eyes narrowed and claws flexing. Kaiser Ghidorah turned to face his foe head-on, screaming in bitter rage. The Emperor of Terror reared up as the Jade Serpent drew near, ready to crush his foe with his massive forelimbs. He came down, but Mega Rayquaza dodged to the side, leaving the horse-like legs to crash against the ground. One of the Sky God's claws hands sank into the exposed flesh of Kaiser Ghidorah's right side, before Mega Rayquaza ripped it free to escape a headbutt. The Golden Nightmare observed the wound, which oozed a vile ichor as black as the owner's soul. The head that tried to bash into the Emerald Serpent shot out a gravity beam which ensnared his foe. Dragging the Sky God to his front, Kaiser Ghidorah stomped on Mega Rayquaza's body, pinning him to the ground. The Herald of the Apocalypse fired gravity bolts onto his trapped foe, raking them across the serpent's back. Burning wounds were etched into Mega Rayquaza's body, while making him writhe in anguish. The deity of the atmosphere maneuvered his tail around one of the vile Kaiser's back legs, pointing at the end of one of the knees. A superpowered twister shot out from the appendage, crashed into the limb, making it kneel. Kaiser Ghidorah stumbled, crying out in surprise as Mega Rayquaza escaped. At lightning speeds, the Jade Serpent wrapped his body around the Golden Dragon's own. Mega Rayquaza stared into the Golden Destroyer's left set of eyes, squeezing against his body as hard as he could. Kaiser Ghidorah bashed that skull against the Jade Serpent's own, forcing the Sky God to recoil. The Apocalypse Bringer's other two heads twisted to look at the coils of Mega Rayquaza's body around their own, before channeling power to their mouths. The Jade Serpent pulled hard to the left, forcing Kaiser Ghidorah to fall on that side. The two hit the ground in a tangled mess, both screaming and thrashing. The power that had been built up by the Golden Dragon's center and right head sailed off into the sky, before looping back around. They crashed against Mega Rayquaza's body, blasting apart flesh and disintegrating one of the fins on his body. The Jade Serpent cried out in pain, both from the blast that the blast and the weight coming down upon him. Kaiser Ghidorah levitated off the ground, letting the Jade Serpent uncoil and attempt to escape. One of the Emperor of Terror's jaws snapped around the Sky God's flesh, before dragging him before the other two mouths. Mega Rayquaza cried out in rage as he felt his energy being drained, the blue glow in Kaiser Ghidorah's throats only intensifying the fury. Pass.
The Emerald Serpent threw his arm upwards, slapping the Golden Dragon's central face. The demon barely noticed, which was exactly what Mega Rayquaza hoped for. Holding his arm back once more, the Sky God aimed one of his claws at Kaiser Ghidorah's eye. The talons sunk into the blood-red orb, tearing through it and causing a jet of blood to spray from the wound. All three of the Golden Dragon's heads released their grips, screeching as he backed away. The inside of Mega Rayquaza's maw glowed as an orange sphere of pure energy manifested before it. The Golden Nightmare let loose a shriek of horrid rage before a hyper beam crashed into his center head. The column of energy began melting anything it touched, the pain being too great for the dragon to even scream. When the attack faded, all that was left atop the middle neck of the Apocalypse Bringer was an unrecognizable blob which dripped and bubbled before the neck fell limp. What had once been Kaiser Ghidorah's center head hit the ground, splashing disgusting fluids and slimes across the ruined ground. The massive form of the dragon hit the concrete, spasming violently as the remaining two heads tried to compensate for the sudden, grave loss. Mega Rayquaza stared at this for a moment, panting heavily. He was nearing his limit. Even this mighty form was not invincible. He had to end this quickly, and now was the perfect opportunity. The Sky God shot into the air like a bullet, stopping once he reached roughly a mile into the heavens. He shot back down, aiming his body at the thrashing menace below. A green fire surrounded his body as he descended, making him resemble a falling comet, ready to obliterate whatever it hit. Kaiser Ghidorah slowly got to his feet, legs shaking and breathing raggedly. Yes, his legs were breathing raggedly. His two heads swayed through the air, dazed. They would have both vomited if he ate solid matter like most beings did. The two heads could retake full control of the body if given enough time, and all would be back to normal for them. But when his four eyes looked up at the sky and saw a glowing green pillar of fire coming towards them, he knew there wouldn't be enough time. Mega Rayquaza used Dragon Ascent, crashing into Kaiser Ghidorah's back at Mach speeds. There was an explosion at the impact, which stripped away plates of armor off the Golden Dragon's back and sent them flying away for miles, trails of smoke following them. The sheer power of the impact snapped the Emperor of Terror's spine in half, the roar of the explosion drowning out the sickening crack. The Apocalypse Bringer was nearly folded in half, making the trench carved in the armor covering Kaiser Ghidorah's stomach explode in a shower of blood as his intestines were forced out of the skin, the pressure on his back wreaking havoc on the golden dragon's insides. The remaining two mouths, along with the melted stump of his center head, followed suit by spewing streams of black gore. Kaiser Ghidorah hit the ground dead instantly. Rayquaza followed suit, alive but comatose, landing in the black pool formed by his foe's death. He would awaken soon, but for now he would take all the rest he could have. The inhabitants of Castelia City came out of their hiding places, staring in awe at the scene before them. All over the world, people cheered at their savior's victory. In the metropolis, their battle had taken place in. Some cheered, others were silent. Some were so overcome by the joy in another day of life they couldn't help but shout. Others believed that they had lost too much to even so much as clap their hands. But all agreed on something. Pass.
On this day, Rayquaza has proven why the people and Pokemon of Earth have nothing to fear, for as long as their guardians drew breath, nothing could ever drag them into oblivion, no matter how cruel the universe and its inhabitants were. Winner, Rayquaza.
That's right, Alex. You still get to finish these off.
Yeah.
Yay!
But yeah, no, I think there were a couple of. I do feel if there are any criticisms I do have, it's mostly the fact that there were a couple points where it was like burns, marks, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think there could have been one or two times where you could have replaced certain terminologies like Emperor of Terror with something else.
Yeah.
Just one or two times, really. But I think other than that, though, I was expecting this to be a much longer read than it turned out to be. Sure, I may have accidentally stumbled in the beginning a bit since this is the first time. Fun fact, everyone. First time we've been reading this in a while. Anyway, may or may not keep that in the final cut. Anyway, but nevertheless, this is like a very... I actually think this is a really well-paced match. It utilizes both combatants well and gives both sides enough to do. I don't think it ever really despite its length, it never felt like it really dragged. It felt like they knew things were happening, new things happened, things changed, nothing stood in the same place for long. So it was I think it was really nice just to have everything move at nice everything moved at nice speeds, and I think even the way the Pokemon techniques were integrated worked really well. Because you would describe what happened first before you said the name of the move. Like glowing teeth for Crunch or, air slash stuff. You get a good visual of what the move is before you get the name of the move. I think this one, I aside from a couple minor points, this one I think holds up really well. It's really exciting to finally read this again after so long. So, yeah, no. Pat your 2018 self on the back, or 2017 self on the back, I guess. No, this one's really good. So.
Thank you. My thoughts next?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. I'm proud of this one. Obviously, I see a lot of places where I could have improved it, but, I mean, for something written 3 years ago, yeah, pretty good. I'm happy with this.
Yeah, I think my only problem with this match is it felt a little redundant at times, particularly when Rayquaza was sinking in the ocean. It says various fish and fish Pokemon. That seems a bit redundant to me. I feel like you could have just chose one or the other, and we would have gotten the idea.
Yeah.
And there was one other part that felt odd to me, but now I can't find it. But no, Kaiju X, both combatants were portrayed very well. Rayquaza felt like a hero, which again you did a great job with that. Monster X felt threatening, and definitely is a good villain when I felt bad for the Pokemon dying, being reduced to ash, all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think this match holds up very well, aside from a few redundant parts.
Redundant minor spelling errors and so on. Other than that, though, it's holds up really well. I think, like, it's probably not that hard to make a space monster integrate into the Pokemon. For whatever reason, and it could just be the way this was presented, I think the circumstances of the encounter felt organic. Like, I actually had no problem envisioning Monster X in the Pokemon world. It didn't feel out of place. It felt surprisingly well at home. Surprisingly. And I'm like, huh. It's like a thing I could see happening, and I'm not sure what it is, but there's just something about it that clicks.
Yeah, that's sort of the benefit with space monsters, and especially Ghidorahs, whose whole thing is showing up to planets unannounced, is you can just sort of integrate them into anything.
Yeah, I guess it is that. The fact that it's like, it's just a space monster, and Rayquaza would naturally be in the upper stratosphere flying around doing his thing. So it's like, yeah, their encounter makes sense. The way they approach each other just makes logical sense.
Yep.
So, yeah, no. But with that said, this has been our reading of Match 13, and we will see you guys next time for Match 14 of the KWCE. Till then, everyone, see you then.
No. Poison.